everybody, and welcome back to another mathematics video. And I trust that these videos that you've been looking at, they have been helpful and you now have a better understanding and appreciation of mathematics, especially C-Sec mathematics. Now in this video, we'll be looking at quadratic equations. Now I know in previous videos we looked at factorizing quadratics. Now in this video, we'll be taking it a step further. We'll be solving quadratic equations. And we'll be doing that by factorization. So at the end of this video, you should be able to solve quadratics after factorization. So let's recap what we know about quadratic equations. Now we know a quadratic expression, the general form for a quadratic expression is ax squared plus or minus bx plus or minus c. And this is the general form for a quadratic expression. Now for the quadratic equation, the only difference is, or the only addition that we're doing to this what we currently have is that we're equating this to 0. Because we know in an equation, we must have an equal sign. So all we're doing, we're equaling this to 0. And here we have the general form of a quadratic equation. Ax squared plus or minus bx plus or minus c equals 0. So now that we can remember the general form, now that we have remembered the general form of a quadratic expression, and we took that information, we turned it into an equation, now let's look at how we can solve quadratic equations. Now remember, to solve any equation, the whole purpose is to find the value of the unknown in the equation. So let's look at this first example. The first example is solve the following, and we have 2x squared minus 7x plus 3 is equal to 0. And the instruction is to solve this equation. Now we can see this is a quadratic equation because it's in the general form. And to solve this, we are doing something that we are already familiar with, the first step. The first step is to factorize this quadratic. And we'll factorize it using the AC method that we learned previously. So let's factorize this expression using the AC method. So the first thing is that we identify the value of A, B, and C. So we see A is equal to 2, B is equal to -7, and C is equal to 3. And after we're done identifying the value of A, B, and C, now we find AC. So we see AC is equal to 2 multiplied by C, which is 3. And 2 multiplied by 3 would give you 6. And now we have the big step. The big step, which is to find two values. When you multiply them, you must get this AC, which is 6. And then when you add them, you should get B, in this case, which is -7. So we box our mind, we think around, we think about the factors of 6. And we have two factors. Since we want to find a -7, we must have a negative in the two terms. In this case, we see we can use -6 times -1 will give us a +6, because we know a negative times a negative will give you a positive, and 6 times 1 will give you 6. And then we have -6 plus -1 will give us -7, because we have the positive and a negative, or the plus and the minus together. These two will cancel out and give us a minus. So -6 subtract 1 will give you -7. So we have our two numbers that we are substituting for -7 in the equation. So we'll have 2x squared minus 6x minus, instead of 1x, we'll just say x plus 3 is equal to 0. Next, of course, we pair off the terms, and then we factorize each bracket individually. So we look at the first bracket, 2x squared minus 6x. We look at the 2 and the 6. We see between the numbers, we see 2 is the highest common factor, so we factor out the 2. And then we look at the letters, the variables. We see x is the highest common factor between x squared and x. So we factor out 2x. And when we factor out 2x from the first term, we are left with simply x. When we factor out 2x from the second term, we're left with -3. And then we go to the second bracket. So remember, we have this negative sign in front here. And in the previous video, I emphasized that whatever sign is in front, that is the sign you're factoring out. So we have to factor out the negative first of all. And then we see we don't have any coefficients in common, no numbers in common, nor do we have any variables in common. So we factor out 1, because 1 is the highest common factor between those two, since they had nothing else in common. So we factor out the negative 1 from the first term, when we factor out negative 1 from negative x, we're left with positive x. And when we factor out negative 1 from positive 3, we're left with 3 divided by negative 1 will give us a negative 3. So we're left with minus 3, and that is equal to 0. And then the last step to factorize this here, we take what is outside and we put it in a bracket. So this will be 2x subtract 1 in one bracket and x minus 3 in another bracket, and that is equal to 0. So that is how we factorize. But remember, we are not factorizing, we are solving. And I want us to pay keen attention to these terminologies in these questions. When you're asked to factorize, you stop at this step. Well, of course, you won't have equals 0. When you're asked to solve, you take it a step further. You have to find what is the value of these unknowns. So we see we have two brackets, and both of these brackets are equal to 0. So what we can do, we can separate them and we can equate both brackets to 0 separately. So we'll have 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. And x minus 3 is equal to 0. And then we solve both of these things individually. So to solve 2x minus 1 equals 0, we know this is an equation that I said that we must know how to solve. So we take over the minus 1, it's subtracting, when we take it over, we'll add. So we'll have 2x is equal to 1. And then the 2 is multiplying the x. So when we take it over, it will divide. So we'll have x is equal to 1 divided by 2, which is 1 over 2. So we can take this a step forward and say x is equal to 0.5. And then for the next equation, x minus 3 is equal to 0. So the 3 is subtracted, we take it over, we'll add. So we'll have x is equal to positive 3. And these are our two values for x. 0.5 and 3. And of course, there is a way for us to check to see if our answer is correct. And I want us to do that. Because when you get these questions, you want to leave the exam room knowing whether you got it correct or not. So let's do that check. So let's check. So what we're doing, we are substituting both of these values into this equation, and we'll see if it will satisfy the equation. And remember, to satisfy an equation, the two sides must be balanced with each other after you finish simplifying and working out. So let's take the first one, which is 0.5. So this will be 2, we're taking this equation and we're putting x equals 0.5 inside. So this will be 2 multiplied by 0.5 instead of x raised to the second power, subtract 7 times 0.5 plus 3, and that should be equal to 0. So 0.5 raised to the second power will be 2 multiplied by 0.25, subtract 7 times 0.5 will give us 3.5 plus 3, and that should be equal to 0. So 2 times 0.25 would give us 0.5 minus 3.5 plus 3. That should give us 0. And when we subtract 0.5, subtract 3.5, that would give you minus 3 plus 3. That would give us 0. So this side will work out and give you 0 is equal to 0. So yes, the 0.5 checks out. So now let's replace 3 and see if that will satisfy. So instead of putting back x, we replace x and we'll put 3. So this will be 2 multiplied by 3 squared would be 9. Subtract 7 times 3 would give you 21 plus 3, and that should be equal to 0. 2 times 9 is 18. Subtract 21 plus 3 would give you 0. 18 subtract 21 would give you negative 3 plus 3, and that will give you 0. Negative 3 subtract 3 would give you 0 is equal to 0. So that checks out as well, and we know our answer is absolutely correct. And if we see a question like this, we can leave the exam room after checking, knowing that we gained all of these marks. So let's look at another example, a final example to solidify our understanding. So let's say we have 3x to the second power plus 14x plus 8 is equal to 0. And we want to solve this quadratic equation. So of course we are factorizing first and then we are solving. So the first thing we want to do, we want to factorize this expression using the AC method. So we know we have to identify A, B, and C. So we know A in this case is equal to 3, B is equal to 14, and C is equal to 8. So we find AC. So we see AC would be 3 multiplied by 8. And 3 multiplied by 8 would give you 24. And this important step, we want two numbers. When we multiply these two numbers, we should get 24. And when we add them, we should get the value of B, which is 14. So we think about some factors and we see we can have 12 multiplied by 2 would give us 24. And 12 plus 2 would give us the 14. So these are the two important numbers that we will use to replace 14x. So we'll have now 3x squared plus 12x plus 2x, because that is what we're replacing, plus 8 is equal to 0. So we pair off, and then we have two simple brackets to factorize. So we look at the first bracket, we see 3x squared plus 12x, and we see the highest common factor between 3 and 12 would be 3, and the highest common factor between x squared and x would be x. So we factor out the 3x, and we factor out the 3x from the first term, we're left with simply x. When you factor out 3x from 12x, you see we are left with 12x divided by 3x. This x will cancel out with that x. 12 divided by 3 would give you 4. So we're left with plus 4. And then we look at the second bracket, we see the plus is in front here, so we factor out that plus. And then we see the numbers 2 and 8, the highest common factor there would be 2. And then we have x, and we don't have any variable for 8, so there's no variable in common. So we factor out the plus 2, and we factor out plus 2 from the first term, we're left with x. When we factor out plus 2 from the second term, 8 divided by 2 would give you 4, so we're left with plus 4. And that is equal to 0. So we see our two brackets are the same. Important thing to know that we are going correct. So we bring down what is outside the bracket, we put that in a bracket. So we'll have 3x plus 2 in a bracket. And then we'll have x plus 4 in another bracket, and that is equal to 0. So we are done with factorizing. Now we want to do the solving part, because that is what the question asks. So we equate the two brackets to 0. So we'll have 3x plus 2 is equal to 0, and x plus 4 is equal to 0. So 3x plus 2, we take over the 2. The 2 is adding, so when we take it over, we'll subtract. So we'll have 3x is equal to negative 2. And then the 3 is multiplying, so when we take it over, it will divide. So we'll have x is equal to negative 2 divided by 3. Hence, x will be equal to negative 2 divided by 3 will give us a negative 0.66666. So we'll just run it after 6.7 approximately. So the next thing, we have x plus 4 is equal to 0. So x is equal to, the 4 is adding, and we take it over, we'll subtract. So we'll have x is equal to negative 4. So we have our two values for x. And of course, we know we can check to see if our answer is correct. So we don't have to check as long as you know what you did is correct. You don't have to go back and check, but I would advise that you check. So in your own time, you can check to see if this answer is correct. So we can end off by saying, therefore, x is equal to negative 0.67 and x is equal to negative 4. So one thing we notice is when we solve quadratics, we would normally get two values for x. So that's one thing we want to pick up on. When you finish solving a quadratic, we get two values for x. So with that, I'll leave this one for you to practice on your own. So you want to solve this. X squared plus 2x minus 15 is equal to 0. Solve this equation. And with that, it has brought us to the end of this video. I trust that you now have a better understanding of how to solve quadratic equations by factorizing. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.